Here is the page that has the entire One Piece community going completely nuts right now because, oh boy, things are not as we all thought they were. Now, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, in this page right here, we get the introduction panels for Mr. Shamrock, Mr. Evil Twin for Shanks, but also for Gonko, who turns out to be maybe one of the most important characters that we have gotten in like the last 3-4 arcs, which really says something. I mean, Gonko is one of the Holy Knights. Gonko is now the vessel for Imu? What? And Oda changed something about Gonko that kind of threw the entire One Piece community into the biggest debate I have seen in a long time, which, if you know anything about One Piece and the people who watch it, is a pretty big deal. Now here's the deal. When chapter 1137 first came out, the box here did regularly say Saint Shamrock of the Figalan family. In Japanese it says Shamurokuse, the same honorific that all the other Celestial Dragons also get, but Gonko's had nothing. It just said Gonko, and she has the arrow fruit. That, of course, threw all of us into a big frenzy because suddenly the question was, can the Holy Knights actually not be Celestial Dragons? Especially after they then invite Loki to join the Holy Knights. I think a lot of people were just wondering, okay, do the Holy Knights just recruit really powerful and potent people into their ranks from wherever they can find them? And maybe that way they get a chance to become part of the world nobles without actually legitimately being born one. And it led to a whole host of other theories, like, Gonko was similar to Ginny. She got kidnapped and needed to, marry one of the other Holy Knights or Celestial Dragons, and then when they found out that she was powerful, she became one of the Holy Knights. Or maybe she was taken specifically because her compatibility with Imu, and that's how she ended up in this very special, unique role without being a Celestial Dragon, still being part of this elite troop. Or if you follow this channel, you will probably know that once we found out that Gonko actually has weird, suppressed memories of Brook and loves his music, and Brook seems to remember Gonko from somewhere, we were speculating immediately here that, maybe Brook is Gonko's father. Might be like this whole secret history to this character Brook that we just don't know yet, kind of how it happened with Sanji, for instance. By the way, we'll get back to that one too in the context of this video. So a ton of really cool theories. We did a bunch. I think every other One Piece creator and just the community in general, we focused really in on this because, again, this is a major character with connections to Brook, the Straw Hats, which is also a vessel for the secret ruler of the world itself. And then, boom, with the release of this chapter in Japan right now, everything changes because now the panel reads something different from what it originally did. Because now it reads Saint Gonko of the Myanmar family, and then still the arrow fruit, and it kind of changes a lot that we took for granted, and I do think we do need to talk about it because it has some massive implications about the rest of the story and how we are gonna consume it as One Piece fans. Now, since you're watching this video, I would assume that you're probably someone like me who is very into One Piece and who does read the chapters on a weekly basis when they drop, right? But in case you're not and you're saying, Manu, why don't you just buy the volume when it comes out? Everything is correct, what's in there. So what's the big fuss all about? Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this? And well, the answer is quite simple. The biggest One Piece fans usually read and consume the manga on a weekly basis. We wait for it patiently, and right now, there's weeks like these where there is no chapter and we suffer in silence and cry in the corner, right? And so whenever we get something, especially with One Piece, which is the manga that has the most speculation potential and the most theorizing potential out of any story maybe ever, we take everything that we get and we try to figure out what Oda is telling us here. Now, is this because One Piece fans like me are completely crazy? Partly yes, but also Oda is an author who loves to leave little droplets and little breadcrumbs in his story everywhere that foreshadow later events, foreshadow plot twists, foreshadow big reveals about important characters. A great example that maybe applies here very nicely is the reveal of the Gorosei's demon forms where, turns out we didn't get any devil fruit names, which then immediately led to a whole wave of speculation about, hey, could this mean that the Gorosei don't have devil fruits? Could it be something else? Could they be like actual demons? Which, turns out that's absolutely what's probably happening, as Demo was able to do Domi Reversi, do a devil contract basically with people to give them demonic powers, which seems to be the explanation that Oda has been hinting at by basically not putting a devil fruit name on their crazy demon forms in Egghead Islands. Therefore, when we got this chapter with Gonko, we all went crazy about it because, hey, she's a massive character that just kept getting more and more important as the arc has been going on in Elbaf. And so, of course, this was peak material for us speculating that, once again, Oda is giving us something juicy here. He's leaving us breadcrumbs about Gonko, what makes her special. We should be paying attention to this. And so when suddenly, in a volume that comes out months after this chapter has dropped, fixes this without any comment and is just like, yeah, by the way, she is a celestial dragon after all, it does kind of taste a little bit bitter, I gotta admit. It kind of takes away like the trust that, we usually have in Oda doing things the way he does. Me, as a professional One Piece connoisseur, I go into every single chapter assuming that pretty much everything that's important is done with a lot of intent and with purpose by Oda. Again, because he is the god of foreshadowing, right? But with stuff like this happening more often recently, it is a little bit dangerous now, where I'm kind of feeling like, hey, is this on purpose? Is Oda telling us something with this detail? Or is this just a little mistake that's gonna get fixed later on? And again, there's a lot of examples about little things like this which are just gonna be relevant. I mean, imagine the phrasing in the mural or something that we got in Elbaf being slightly different in the end, and it changes everything that we thought was true, right? Or, little facts about Luffy's devil fruit power just changed that suddenly. Everything's different, right? It's stuff like this. If you just change it in retrospect as a retcon, it does ruin a little bit the trust we have in Oda to, make sure that the hints that he put so purposefully into his story, all the foreshadowing, is actually accurate. Now, with that being said, I'm personally actually not as mad or concerned about this as many other people seem to be, and I will explain to you why. But to do that, we kind of need to dive into the history of retcons in One Piece, because as it turns out, this is not the first time that Oda has changed things in retrospect. Stuff like this has been kind of accompanying One Piece as a whole throughout its history, even going all the way back to chapter 1, where we see Haki essentially for the first time. But we do also know that Haki is kind of maybe the biggest retcon that has ever happened in One Piece. It is a whole unique new power system that Oda basically introduced after the time skip, after he kind of figured that Luffy needs to get to the next level, after already having become really strong with his devil fruit, and also having the issue of Logia fruit users, which, could just not be dealt with. Now you might say, Manu, there have been a lot of pieces of foreshadowing for Haki throughout the story. We had Shanks in chapter 1 clearly using what then became Conqueror's Haki to intimidate the Sea King. We had Mantra in Shandora and Skypiea. We had the admirals using what's technically Rio during the Marineford War. We had signs of Zoro using what might just be armament or even Conqueror's Haki, even as far back as Alabasta, if we're being real. And while I do agree that Oda very clearly had an idea that a power system like Haki would at some point exist in the story, he very clearly had not fully figured it out at that point. And while Haki does work surprisingly well in retrospect with a lot of aspects of the story, its introduction still led to some, problems nonetheless. For example, the fight Ace versus Blackbeard, why didn't they use Haki? Why was there no Haki there? Why did no one see any armament Haki before that? Why, during the Marineford War, was Haki apparently not a big thing? How did Crocodile not know Haki when fighting Luffy? Now, one could of course make the argument that since Luffy didn't know about Haki and the Straw Hats didn't, we as a reader could not see it, while after Luffy learned it, we can now very clearly see when a, person is using armament or even observation, and of course Conquerors with the lightning. But it doesn't change the fact that Oda kind of only fully realized that concept at a later point in the story. And is that a thing that anyone is complaining about? I hope not, because I think the introduction of Haki made the story so much more fun and interesting than, it already was. It already was, and then Oda made it even better with Haki, right? I'm personally not complaining. Another great example, if you wanted to go back to chapter 1, is of course Shanks losing his arm. Now, we know for a fact that was a decision that one of Oda's early editors made, who felt like the first chapter needed more punch. There needed to be a big tragic twist. So even though Oda didn't want to, he kind of decided to have Shanks give up his arm or take his arm. Now, of course, we kind of know that the two most obvious explanations for this are, one, Shanks wanted to inspire Luffy and kind of did that in a very tragic way, even though he could have probably headbutted the Sea King away into infinity. And also the second thing is, we now know that Shanks has this very mysterious mark on him that's probably tied to the Figaland family, like something that has to do with his time up in the Holy Land and maybe even the Abyss, and he apparently wanted to get rid of it, which is the other very obvious explanation that we have right now for it. Doesn't change the fact that it is technically a retcon. But again, does it make the story any worse? I don't think so. I think it makes it fun, and it kind of forces Oda also to be creative and evolve his story as, things go on, which I think we all kind of want to happen. Then we had, of course, Sabo, who by himself was a whole retcon character, because there was pretty much no hint whatsoever in the story at all that Luffy had a second brother. Suddenly, during the time skip, we then learn that, oh, Sabo is a thing, he had amnesia, and he joined the Revolutionary Army, then popping up later in the story to help Luffy once again, kind of taking Ace's spot. Now, am I the biggest fan of the amnesia trope in One Piece? Not necessarily, especially for Sabo and Big Mom. It was kind of handled a little bit, let's just say, not optimally. But with that being said, would I be happier if Sabo was not in the story? No way, bro. Like, Sabo being there, giving Luffy's backstory so much more depth, giving Luffy and Ace's dynamic an additional factor, and all of that, especially with the connecting piece that Sabo builds between Luffy and the Revolutionaries, and also, of course, what we've seen with Sabo and the entire Reverie plot. I love that Sabo is in the story, and I do not mind that maybe, we don't know for sure, but maybe he wasn't planned to be in the story when Oda started writing it and wrote Luffy and Ace's brotherhood. And if you're thinking, Manu, I mean, these retcons, they exist, but they've never been a big plot point as they are right now with main characters like Gonko. Think again. We have it within the Straw Hats itself. Now, I will say I don't think that the Niga fruit is a retcon. I do think that that is a plot twist very much that Oda had planned from the beginning. You could make the argument. I think it wouldn't hold up. But we do have retcons very much for my boy Zoro and for my boy Sanji, who I don't have a figurine of, I just realized. Need to fix that. Now for Zoro, I'm of course mostly talking about the entire reveal about his family history in Wano. We had 4 years of Wano, insane amounts of chapters, over 100 chapters that we spent in Wano, with a lot of side quests and side stories, and somehow nowhere within that did Oda find the time to place, anything about Zoro and his connection to the Wano country and what his family backstory actually was. We were all expecting Wano to be Zoro's big arc, and well, he did of course get a lot of power-ups, a cool fight against Kaido, and then of course King. We got close to nothing about his connection and backstory when it came to Wano itself, until Oda then showed us in an SBS, one of the question corners within the manga here. Let me see if I can find one for you. They're usually between the chapters. If you've ever wondered what the SBS looks like, it looks something like this. This is one about, where is it here? This one is one about Gunko's panties, in case you're wondering. But in one of these question corners, Oda just said, oh, by the way, here's Zoro's entire family tree, by the way. Yeah, he's part of the Shimotsuki clan, and here's the whole story about how they came to the East Blue and started the village there and the dojo. Now, why was there no place to put this in the story in Wano when we had stuff like the Zumo fight, which, don't get me wrong, was fun and I enjoyed, but I would have probably rather have had a little bit, like at least half a chapter or something, of Zoro interacting with people in Wano, actually learning about his heritage. Like, I think Zoro doesn't even know what his heritage truly is at this point. And if you think it's only Zoro, don't you worry, because we're also going to talk about his rival Sanji, because he has his own retcon stuff going on too. One could argue that his entire second backstory with, the entire Germa Kingdom was sort of a retcon too, which wasn't really hinted at too much. The only argument I think you could make against that point is that Sanji's wanted poster said only alive for quite a while at a certain point, kind of hinting at the fact that there was more to Sanji's backstory, but otherwise it kind of came out of nowhere. Like, we didn't have any foreshadowing about Sanji really having any cyborg powers or genetic manipulation going on, and then we got Sanji's crazy backstory in Whole Cake Island. Once again though, are we really complaining? Because this might have been the best thing that ever happened to Sanji. It made his character so much better. It kind of gave him a whole new character arc in the new world that started with Whole Cake Island, continued in Wano with him finally, putting on the raid suit, then taking it off again, awakening his Germa powers, which he's then struggling with in Egghead Island and now on Elbaf. It gave so much to his character, made it so much more fun. I think if it was a retcon, which again, I'm not convinced by, I think it was absolutely worth it. And yes, if we want to be more nitpicky, there are some other plot holes or retcons that are maybe a little bit more rough around the end, like not handled the most elegant way. I guess we can stick with Sanji. Like there's the whole thing where he didn't know about Devil Fruit users losing the ability to swim, despite the fact that then in Thriller Bark, he said that he read the entire Devil Fruit encyclopedia, and that like Absalom's invisibility fruit would be the only one he felt like it would be worth losing the ability to swim for, even when he was a kid, right? Like that kind of was a contradiction, and I feel like we didn't get an explanation for it. Or there's also stuff like the silhouettes that we get for especially characters like Kaido or Big Mom that then look nothing like the characters when we actually get them. I think again you could explain it with, hey, kind of like with hockey, the characters don't know what they look like yet, so this is kind of a representation of the vibe that Oda wants to give us, and maybe that the people are feeling themselves. And then of course we have the type of retcon where Oda kind of plays funny god, is the way I would describe it. Like for example, Galdino is floating on water despite being a Devil Fruit user. He should just sink and drown like a good boy. And then Oda kind of said like, oh yeah, about that. Yeah, he was floating on a piece of very, very floaty and sturdy wood that we didn't see. Like, kind of being funny about it, and I kind of appreciate that he at least gives us an explanation for it. Now, with all of that being said though, let's return to the question at hand. What does this specific retcon with Gonko mean for the future of the story, and why is it still a big deal? And to answer that, maybe we should start with the question, why did this happen to begin with? And I do think that there are three possible answers here. Number one, I think it could be possible that Oda simply made a mistake and then he fixed it. He wanted to put it in, didn't think about it, then put it in later. If that were to be the case, kind of a shame, because again, it kind of messed up a lot of people's perception of what was going on and what Oda was going for here, but it's still understandable. The second idea is that Oda did plan to reveal this later for some reason, but then didn't find the right timing to do so, and so was just like, okay, let's just put it into the chapter. Like, I was gonna go somewhere with this, but now I'm not gonna go anywhere with it after all, and just changing it. Then that personally would be my favorite explanation, because it would kind of suggest that Oda maybe wanted to go somewhere else with it. Like maybe he was like, oh, Gonko could actually be someone who got kidnapped or have like a different backstory. And then maybe he saw, our cool theory about Gonko, being Brook's son and part of a Celestial Dragon family, and was like, that one sounds fun. Let's have Gonko be a Celestial Dragon after all. I'm just kidding, of course, but you get the drift. Like, you wanted to do something else, then was like, nah, changed my mind, gonna do this after all. And so he just put it now in the volume instead of randomly dropping the same title like 30 chapters later. I think fair enough. Now, the third explanation would be my least favorite one, and also the most worrying one, which would be that Oda has such a strong headcanon and, of course, knows everything about his world and the story, that it could be that he sometimes forgets that we don't know what he knows. Like, maybe in his mind, he's thinking, oh, all the Holy Knights of course are Celestial Dragons, like that's a given. And so maybe he didn't put it in because he's like, yeah, everyone's just gonna know that Gonko is gonna be a Celestial Dragon, and who cares? I'm just gonna fix it now if people make a big thing about it. I hope that that's not true, because it would kind of suggest that Oda doesn't really have a good feeling for what people actually know and are aware of with his story. I kind of don't think that that's the case. He kind of mentioned that actively, that he wants to be careful not to overestimate people's knowledge. So I don't think it's that option. But what does it really mean going forward for the story? Because my personal takeaway from this is that from now on, whenever I read a One Piece chapter and I see something that seems out of place, my usual gut feeling would be to be, oh, Oda is doing this on purpose. Like something is missing or something is a little bit off, and it does, like, Oda must be hinting at something here. Now going forward, I'm probably gonna think did Oda make another mistake here? Is this like the weird, is this like, the sword is on the wrong side, or like the weird outfit changes that happened at the beginning of the arc? Like, I don't know. It's taking a little bit of the fun of theorizing away, or like jeopardizing it, and I'm definitely not gonna be as confident in certain things as I have been so far, where I was just assuming Oda to be so careful and really delicately putting these little hints or like apparent mistakes in as actual hints that something else is at work here, which is actually going to be relevant to the story, right? If that makes sense. And you kind of have to wonder what else is going to be confirmed in retrospect, right? Like, are there going to be names that are going to be changed? Devil fruit names? Character powers? More clan and family names that are just going to be dropped in random, you know, like question corners instead of being actually in the story? I hope not. Once again, for me personally, this is not a really big deal. It's been something that has been with One Piece for a while, and I think Oda has always found elegant answers to retcon problems like this. But that being said, it has been a little bit unsettling that a big character, you know, reveal like this kind of got then changed in retrospect, kind of changing the entire perception of the character overall 2 or 3 months after the fact that the chapter was published. But with that being said, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think about this. Is it a big deal? Is it not a problem at all? Is it a minor nuisance? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you enjoy formats like these. I love covering maybe more, you know, recent One Piece news and breaking down stuff like this. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.